those who have any questions for the presenter, you are allowed to do so during the Q&A session. And number 3, to maintain a professional atmosphere, kindly listen attentively and remain silent during the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker today is Mr. Sean Killerchen. He will share his insights about ethical AI in educational assessment, balancing innovation and integrity. Mr. Sean is the co-founder and CEO of EduSynch, a global leader in language assessment solutions, now powered by AI. Born and raised in New York City, Mr. Sean has a background in computer science and economics, with early experience at Wall Street and Forbes Media. Drawing on both technical and business experience, he founded EduSynch to help institutions modernize their language proficiency evaluation processes. EduSynch now serves over 1.1 million users in every country on earth and partners with 104 educational institutions and corporations worldwide. EduSynch's flagship offerings, the CEFR level test and EduSynch's placement test, assess all 4 language skills with instant, scalable scoring. The CEFR level test is also officially recognized by the Ministry of Education in Malaysia, reinforcing its global credibility. Backed by powerful machine learning models and real-time behavioral analysis, EduSynch helps organizations make smarter, faster and fairer decisions. With global experience shaped by time in Brazil and India, Mr. Sean is passionate about building inclusive, accessible, and data-rich edtech solutions and frequently shares insights on AI assessment and startup growth on LinkedIn. Without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Sean Killerchen to share his thoughts. Please join me to give him a warm round of applause.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me well? How's everybody doing? All right, so before I get started, I just wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. I wanted to thank the organizers of ICELAM as well. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to come to this side of the world. And I also wanted to thank Keith and the team at UBSM, one of the sponsors of today's conference, who is our partner and has been for the last 7 years in Malaysia. As was mentioned, my talk today will be on the ethical use of AI, specifically as it pertains to online testing. But the real theme of today is to essentially set a framework that all of you in your day-to-day can look to as a way to further integrate AI into your policies, into your classes, and of course, into your exams. Just to give you some background and explain why I'm up here, as was mentioned, I'm Sean. I'm the CEO and founder of EduSynch. While I was born and raised in New York City, I did not arrive on Air Force One yesterday with Mr. Trump, unfortunately. But I was born and raised in New York, but I spent the better part of the last 12 years living abroad. So after college, I had a short stint on Wall Street. I was laid off. Banking was obviously not in my future. And I actually moved to South America. I moved to Brazil to start an education venture. My father is originally from India, so I've been coming to India since I was born and have a lot of experience actually in working in India. I interned there a few times over the course of my young life. For the last 12 years, I have been spending a third of the year in America, a third of the year in Brazil, and a third of the year in India. So as you can imagine, I've seen a lot and have experienced a lot, especially when it comes to this world of education. In each country that I've spent time, while the dynamics are different, the demographics are quite similar, and the objectives are all the same. So my experience has led me to Malaysia, where I've been working now for the last 5 years. As was mentioned, one of our products has been certified by the MOE of Malaysia for English certification, and I'll jump into exactly what that means. But just to explain why I'm able to give this talk, I've been in the space for 12 years, and we'll now dive into how we're using AI. So just to give you some background on EduSynch as a business. So this is our tagline. We perform online language testing for companies and schools. Now our focus really is on English, and we do have a number of different offerings when it comes to this world of online testing. Just to give you some background, we originally started the business after I moved to Brazil and experienced firsthand how important English language fluency was for everyone. I'm not sure who here has been to Brazil. If you haven't, I would highly recommend a trip. I know it's a little far away, but worth the expense. Brazil is interesting in that only 3% of the entire country actually has a C1 level of English fluency, meaning they can actually hold a real conversation. This includes at international airports, at the American Airlines counter at the international airport. They are unable to actually have a conversation about your flight, even in English. Now, it was this experience that I had some 10, 12 years ago that led me to found EduSynch. And as many of you know, the high-stakes English exams, like the IELTS and TOEFL, provide significant barriers to most in the world when it comes to higher education or attaining significant levels of employment. Our objective has been and always will be to democratize access to high-quality educational tools when it comes to language learning. So the first thing we did was to start an app, made an app specifically focused on test prep for these high-stakes exams. It's actually gotten pretty cool. Now there's AI throughout the entire application. You can get real-time feedback for your spoken and written proficiency, but I'll dive into that in a bit. After we launched this initiative for test prep, we started building our own exams. And the English certification world, as I'm sure many of you know, is a strange one. It hasn't developed much in the last 40 years. My father, when he moved to the US from India in the late 70s, he took a TOEFL exam. And he actually showed me the score on the test, which is partly what inspired me to go down this journey. Without that TOEFL exam certification, even though he spoke fluent English, he would not have been able to come to the US, and I would probably not be alive. So as a result of this, we really tried to take on this world of English certification exams. For the last 2 years, we've been working hand in hand with ELTC and the Ministry of Education here in Malaysia to democratize this process here as well. We currently proctor our exams online, which I'll dive into what that means. And anyone in Malaysia can now purchase an EduSynch exam online and certify their English without paying $200 like you would for a TOEFL or IELTS exam. As the EduSynch journey progressed, we ended up working with a lot of different universities where they wanted to use our technology but use their exams. So as you can imagine, admissions for a lot of universities, especially those abroad, are a very high-stakes type of exam. And because we have this proctoring technology, now we have artificial intelligence, we're able to actually administer other university admissions exams on our system. In the last 18 months or so, 24 months, we also built our own placement test. And now this is fully powered by AI, including some of the content generation, which I'll dive into how we do that and what that means, so that any organization in the world can now use one of our exams to put students into the right English course. Lastly, over the last 6 months, we've been pushed into other languages outside of English. So we've dived into French, Spanish, German, and there are many more to come over the next 6 months. Now, as was mentioned, just to give you some background on EduSynch as a business, we do have over 1.1 million registered users now. We also have had almost 100 million questions answered on the platform over the last decade. So as you can imagine, we get a lot of interesting data points from students around the world. This includes spoken and written testing as well, which really is our specialty. As I'm sure many of you know, multiple choice testing for subjects like reading comprehension and listening comprehension are quite common and have been common for the last decade. But how do you really analyze someone's spoken fluency or written fluency without being in a room with them? And this is where AI can really help, and I'll jump into that momentarily. We work with all types of organizations around the world, from universities to elementary schools. Even companies like PwC and Walmart will use our solutions to test English fluency for new employees in different countries around the world. As of today, there is at least one EduSynch user in every single country on Earth. So I just wanted to give you this background to explain how important it is that the theme of today's conference, or this conference this week, is maintaining integrity while also pursuing innovation. Some of our clients and partners are names that many of you might recognize. The Ministry of Education in Malaysia probably being the most significant one, in the sense that we've now certified a few thousand individuals over the course of the last 2 years. We also work hand in hand with the Ministry of Education in Thailand, where they're also pursuing an AI-first approach to this world of English certification, all in an effort, once again, to democratize access to high-quality English certification to help people change their lives. We also work hand in hand with universities across the US, as well as organizations that specialize in teaching language, like Babbel, Open English, Berlitz, and of course a few companies scattered in there as well. Now, the big question, how are we using AI? So we've been around since 2015. We'll actually be celebrating our 10-year anniversary in about a month, which, as many of you can imagine, in this world of technology is incredible. But we were not an AI-first company. In fact, as I mentioned, when we started the business, the whole idea was to actually use teachers on the back end to correct all of these submissions we were issuing on the front end. So we actually had a small army of educators. When students would submit their exams, we would actually capture their spoken and written submissions. Then someone on our staff would evaluate it according to whatever criteria we were using, and you as a student would receive your feedback. In the last 18 months, our clients, over 95% of them have shifted from using humans to do this to using AI to do this. And as you can imagine, it's been quite an interesting journey. As of today, we're doing anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000 evaluations per day. Some days it spikes, some days it's lower. But again, the ability to analyze spoken fluency with a robot now exists, and you can do it well. And again, I'll dive into exactly how this works and what the implications are of this if you don't do this correctly. The other component of what we do that is different and of note is remote proctoring. So during COVID, this industry really blew up. It was virtually non-existent beforehand, and then during COVID, it became really top of mind for many educators. Remote proctoring is essentially proctoring exams remotely. So how can you guarantee that a student at home who's taking a university entrance exam or a midterm or an exam that's worth 20% of their grade, how can you guarantee it's actually them doing it and not one of their friends? In the world of English testing, it's quite common to have someone even go to a test center to take your test for you. So as you can imagine, the technology around this has also developed quite a bit and has proven to be very challenging. I'm proud to say that we are now doing this around the world on a daily basis, and we do it with integrity, again, touching on the theme of this conference. The important part being there's always a human being in the loop. At no point will any user take an exam and fail their test because the AI said so. and I'll dive into exactly what that means and how important it is to maintain that for all of us in everything that we're doing moving forward. The last part, which I'm sure you've all seen, is content creation. All of these AI tools are really good at making content, and the video and imagery now is becoming better and better. There's a very famous video of Will Smith eating spaghetti from 3 years ago that was the running joke of the AI world, and now you can't even tell the difference if it's him or not. So we use AI to generate content for social media. We use it for some of our test items as well, always with a human in the loop, but something interesting that could, again, be useful for all of you as we journey down this wormhole of artificial intelligence. Now, just to understand a bit from all of you, so I'm going to ask a few questions, and if you guys could raise your hands in response, that would be great. So, how many of you have heard of ChatGPT? How many of you have used ChatGPT in a professional setting? Okay. How about Claude? How many of you have heard of Claude? How many of you have used Claude in a professional setting? Okay. What about Perplexity? All right. And how many of you have used Perplexity in a professional setting as well? Okay, good. So we have some AI proficient folks in the audience, which is great. I actually forgot to put Google's on here, but I'm not sure if anyone's really using that. At least I'm not. So just to take a step back before I dive into the main topic of today, I wanted just to review how far we've come in assessment. Now, there's actually one item that I left off of this image here, which was the original form of assessment, which was actually talking to someone and seeing what they know. The original Socratic method, if you will. So back when the education system as we know it was created, assessment was simply asking questions and seeing if the person could answer and knew what they were talking about. We then moved to the chalkboard, or the whiteboard. This also was more of a face-to-face type of assessment, but it, again, started to become one-to-many in a more standardized fashion. Then came paper tests. Ironically, a lot of educators I've spoken to are actually going back to paper tests now, but we'll talk about that later. Paper tests were obviously an innovation at the time. It allowed you to standardize your form of assessments and made the life of the teacher and the educator a lot easier. Then the Scantron. The Scantron was something that I experienced when I was a bit younger, but many in Gen Z and Gen Alpha probably have no idea what it is. But the Scantron was the first entry of automation into the world of assessment. Granted, it was very limited in that it was primarily used for, you fill in your bubbles and then everyone submits their papers to the Scantron. But it did really allow for an increase, dramatic increase in efficiency and of course a little bit of removal of the human element. Then came computer-based testing, which has been the standard for the last 20 years. Now, obviously, within computer-based testing, you have a lot of different criteria. You have a lot of different innovations. Machine learning, adaptive testing. These are all terms that everyone in this room is familiar with and have probably used over the course of their academic careers. Now, these are all actually forms of artificial intelligence. If you believe Sam Altman and what they say at ChatGPT and OpenAI, they created AI. It's really not true. We've been using AI in education for the better part of the last 20 years. That being said, it's quite different than what we're seeing nowadays. Now, the big leap from computer-based testing to AI forward testing is not just in the efficiencies that are gained, but in the fact that the intelligence is actually understanding what is being submitted by the student. That's why it feels different. It's not just a new tool, it's a new decision maker. And it's important as educators that we recognize this because we really can't let it make the decisions for us. We're supposed to guide it and not let it guide us. For the first time in my career, and I think in all of ours, the assessor, the AI, is not just marking the test. It's interpreting it. It's predicting what's coming next. And it's able to track historically what's been going on and really gives a higher level of understanding about the test taker, one that at scale, as an educator, is hard to attain. And this raises the stakes for all of us. Now, on to the subject of AI specifically and why it's a game changer. I know that term is overused, but it really is a game changer. So I've shortened this into 4 points. I could probably talk about this for 5 hours, but just to really hammer these points home, the 4 most important things when it comes to assessment specifically: scalability, consistency, feedback, and personalization. Let's start with scalability. This is the first time, not the first time, that one can grade thousands of tests instantly. The Scantron could do that. Computer-based testing does that as well. But this really brings it to the next level. For programs like the IELTS or TOEFL, these high-stakes English tests, even for EduSynch's own exams, the kind of scale that this AI-type evaluation has brought in is incredible. So I'll give you a concrete example of this. When we used to use teachers, we actually had a list of 1,000 educators, teachers around the world, who we could call on to do evaluations for anyone who's conducted an exam on EduSynch's platform. That number has been reduced to about 100 in case we need them. You know, for our testing in Malaysia, we do still have humans doing the evaluations. But the rest of the thousands of exams being done every day are actually being evaluated by artificial intelligence. Instead of having 100,000 tests come in a week and being unable to grade them, we can now grade all of those in less than 1 minute. It's really an incredible leap in terms of efficiency, especially when it comes to harder skills like speaking and writing, which previously were impossible to evaluate at scale without human beings. Consistency is probably the next most important piece here. As every educator knows, after you grade 10, 15, 20, 40 exams, not only are you exhausted, but you start to drift. It impacts you from a level of fatigue. It's frankly impossible to do this at a level of scale that we'd hope we'd be able to attain, but as human beings, we're physically limited. AI doesn't have fatigue. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't lose its level of standardization as it gets later in the evening and, you know, as your kids start turning on their TV shows and you're tempted by Netflix and what have you. This is especially important for skills like speaking and writing and other exams that you might be evaluating where you need to be not only aware, but fresh the whole time. Again, this does not happen with artificial intelligence. It could be doing its 100,000th evaluation of the day, and it would still follow the same rubric and spit out the same result you would hope. At least that's the objective. The third component here is rich feedback. Now, this is particularly interesting in the world of testing, because as I'm sure all of you know, from diagnostic testing to formative assessment to exit testing, usually you have around 1 month to 3 months of a window of time where it's simply inefficient to test someone more than that. What could they possibly learn in that time? As teachers, we have other things on our plate. We have to do other things that don't involve grading tests. Not anymore. We have schools who used to conduct exams once every 3 months. Now they conduct exams once a week. So students are actually able to get a better understanding of where they are and how they're progressing more actively. And again, all of this using artificial intelligence. Think about it from the perspective of the organization. You simply could not provide this level of feedback or this amount of testing. It doesn't make sense economically. It also doesn't make sense in terms of your teachers' usage of their time and their day-to-day. But now, if the AI is doing the evaluations, you can issue hundreds of exams a week. That feedback is given right to you as the educator, and you are given additional insights into each and every one of your students and how they're doing. And this too on a regular basis. And not only this, a lot of educators, when they're grading exams, simply give the score. The student got a 7 out of 10. A lot of computer-based testing was guilty of this as well. Now, even for EduSynch, and I can explain how we currently do this, you don't just get the score, but every student gets individualized feedback based on their own abilities and what they've submitted. I'll give you a concrete example of this, which I personally think is really cool. So for EduSync, for every spoken test that we issue, we evaluate every single user across 4 different criteria: accent and pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, and fluency/coherence. So that means we're measuring things like, are you stuttering? Are you saying or Are you pausing unnaturally during your speech? And all of these are analyzed by artificial intelligence. It sounds like a sci-fi movie, but it's real. And over the last 3 years, we've perfected this to a 94% accuracy degree, which is astounding. So every single student who takes a test using our system gets feedback across each of these 4 parameters every time they take an exam. So you may get a B2 level of English, but within that B2, we'll tell you, you didn't use vocabulary sufficient at a C1 level. You mispronounced these words. You stopped speaking. Your speech wasn't natural for 10 seconds during your 45-second response. It is incredibly accurate and incredibly profound, both for the student and for the teacher. Now, this really changes the entire mindset of what assessment is, because now you can really have it be more learning-oriented and focused on each individual's abilities as opposed to being punitive. Students are no longer worried about taking their exams. Believe it or not, they're actually enjoying taking their exams. Do a speaking test every week, you get your feedback, and you're learning. I already touched on this, but the personalization here really goes above and beyond just what we're doing. So I'll jump into a few examples of this in a bit around schools that are taking this to the next level, where if you're able to assess someone regularly, every week, you're able to then incorporate that feedback into their learning, into their educational experience, and really shape how their pathway will be moving forward. Now, this doesn't just apply to English, it applies to really any skill, but the level of personalization that you can do with this technology is fascinating. It doesn't even just come as the evaluations, it even comes for the test itself. There are now tools you can use to create exams in real time based on each individual's abilities using AI. Again, it sounds like sci-fi, but it's not. This is a new form of adaptive testing where you can even adapt in real time to subjective responses. So as students speak, the system processes it and then feeds them, generates a new question that didn't exist before based on their specific needs. It really is incredible in the sense that even at large scale, you can make it feel very personal for individuals, and it really can help educators and schools as a whole move to the future in a meaningful way. Now on to the fun stuff, the dark side of AI. A lot of this you've probably read about, but the large tech companies do a good job of not talking about this, or at least blaming whoever's using the AI as opposed to the AI itself. Now, I think this is probably maybe the most important part of the presentation, in that as this AI world gets pushed on us harder and harder every day, everyone must remember that there is a downside to it. It is not all shiny stars, but in fact, if we don't think about it and take it forward in the correct way, it can go horribly wrong. So I'm going to dive into each one of these just to explain how they are in relation to our world as educators. Over-reliance, pretty self-explanatory. Can you imagine a world in which students would come to school, they would learn from an AI teacher, take AI exams, and there was no human intervention whatsoever? Because this is the world that a lot of these AI companies are trying to get us towards. And frankly, it's never happening. Schools or institutions that trust the AI too much are jeopardizing not only themselves as institutions of higher learning or of learning in general, but also to the jeopardy of the students. You simply cannot have the AI be the one-all, be-all, end-all of everything. We've all seen Terminator, and we all know how that ends. The real problem is that the AI can miss context. And as was discussed in the previous presentation and even by the minister this morning, if you lose the human touch, we lose it all. So as educators, it's important to not just understand why the student got the score they did, but be present enough to take the student and their experience into context and really use our brains, our human brains, to continue the student's journey. There are also privacy risks. As you know, when you don't pay for the product, you are the product. So every free usage of ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, they're training their systems on our data, which is fine in a general sense, as it leads to better usage of these tools and better tools as a whole. But it can be a little dicey. And when I say that, I mean for companies that are doing remote proctoring without humans in the loop, you're taking screenshots of students, you're filming them on the computer, you're measuring their keystrokes, some are even measuring biometric data, facial recognition, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on, and it gets stranger and stranger as you dive deeper into this world. It's incredibly important that these risks are known and addressed by schools. And I'll tell you how we do it at EduSynch and how we make sure that this is not a problem for most of our partners, but it is something to be aware of as you dive deeper into this realm. I like to say we used to worry about students cheating on exams, and now we have to worry about exams spying on students. The equity gap is also something that's incredibly important to mention. Right now, everything seems normal. ChatGPT is free, or it costs $20 US, not really a big deal. I'm sure you all know this, but there is a tier of ChatGPT that costs $200 US, which gives you infinitely more power when using it. Now imagine if that was $20,000 or $200,000. Then who controls that? What schools get access to that AI? What kind of AI do we use if we're a school in the middle of America and has no budget to spend on AI tools? Open source tools, sure, they're there, but as we all know, the ones that charge are inevitably going to have the most progress. This, again, is not currently the case, but it is certainly going in this direction. So this is something to be very aware of as educators, that wealthier schools in the future may be able to afford more advanced, more well-trained AI systems. And AI could actually widen the gap between institutions and educators and the educated and students. So it's important to remember, while we have this grand vision of AI democratizing education, it's only that way if everyone gets the same version. So again, just food for thought. This is not currently happening, so don't panic, but just things to remember as we move forward. Black box decisions are similar to what I mentioned in terms of over-reliance. Imagine students come in to take a high-stakes exam, and you as the educator, the owner of the school, can't tell them why they got the score they got. This actually happened earlier in EduSynch's journey when we were starting to use AI tools. We didn't implement a framework in the early days, and we were not ready when students came back and asked, why did I get a B1 on my English test? Our teachers didn't know what to answer because they didn't understand the evaluations. This was 3 years ago, and things have progressed a lot since then, but again, just a reminder that black box decisions can be very traumatic for students and problematic for educators and institutions. False positives are also one of the most damaging things in this world in terms of how AI can go wrong. Now, when we built our proctoring tool, we learned from a few companies that actually were bankrupted because they were sued by students for false positives in terms of them cheating on exams, which led to them not getting into university, which virtually destroyed their lives. There were also cases across the US and Europe as well that I was very aware of when we were building this a few years back, that companies using these to discriminate against people applying for jobs. Now, the specific instances that I read about were primarily for students who were taking tests in a dark room, or perhaps they were darker skinned and they weren't picked up by the AI system, it didn't detect them in front of the camera, or they're in a single family household and their brother runs by them in the background and the AI fails their exam. Now imagine how soul-crushing that would be as a student looking to study abroad. You've been trying to do this for 10 years, going to school every day, getting great marks, extracurricular activities, and an AI system fails you on your university admissions because your brother ran behind you during the test. And there's no one there on the other side to complain to. So yes, these companies that I'm talking about went bankrupt. They no longer exist, thankfully. But it is harrowing to think that this was possible, and certainly still is, based on some of the companies that exist. And last but not least, this point of losing the base. When I say the base is human judgment. It's all of you. It is pedagogy, it's ethics, it's the foundation of education. And while, again, we're all getting pushed towards the world of automation and more AI this and more AI that, it's very important to not lose the base. As teachers, seeing the power of these AI scoring tools can be very alluring. It can make it very easy to outsource a large portion of your job, which, frankly, we do at EduSynch. And it makes sense in certain contexts. But I'm sure you've all read these studies of students who outsource every thought to ChatGPT and what it does to their ability to think critically and to think well and to think through problems. The studies are showing that, especially amongst Gen Z and Gen Alpha, I'm a millennial, so it doesn't happen to us, but for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, the younger kids, with this tool, they don't do any more work. They don't do any coursework. They get assigned an essay or a problem from school, they go home, type into ChatGPT, take the answer, paste it into the submission form, and they're done. And this is literally destroying their ability to think critically as human beings. So losing the base is something that, frankly, I'm the most concerned about. As educators, we have to make sure that we're steering the ship in the right direction. So again, I already mentioned this, but this case of a student who was taking an English test online, this happened a few years ago. I think this was actually during COVID, 2021. She was taking a test online, applying to a university, I think in the UK, and she was flagged as cheating on the test, when actually she just looked down at her notes, which was allowed, and she, I think, was in a darker room, and her Wi-Fi went out for about 5 seconds. Immediately flagged as guilty. There was no way to complain to the school. There was no human in the loop at all. So she was not given her scholarship. She was denied entry into the country where she was trying to get to. And as you can imagine, her trust in the system was eroded. She tried to sue. She didn't actually effectively sue them, but it made enough headline news that the university's reputation was destroyed, and they had to remove this form of testing fully from their curriculum. So again, this wasn't just bad tech, it was a bad process. There was no human in the loop. The university didn't even think that this could possibly happen. And the AI wasn't the problem, it was the lack of human oversight, which again is driving back the point that we can't lose the base. Now, on the other side, similar situation. This actually is a case that happened with EduSynch, where one of our universities was proctoring a student for an admissions test. They were flagged as guilty. I think in this case, they were looking off the screen for too long. You can actually do retina tracking with some of this tech now. And they were flagged as guilty, and they didn't fail the test because we actually have a human in the loop. So the flag test was sent to one of our evaluators. They went in, checked the test, saw that she was just looking down at her notes, gave her a pass, and she was given entry into the university, and everything worked out. So again, just to illustrate the point that the tech is not the problem, it's really the process. And if you don't have the process in place to handle this kind of technology, it can go south very quickly. Now onto this theme of balancing innovation and integrity. This is obviously a challenging moment in time for the education space. How do you deal with these two forces pulling in opposite directions? On one side, you have innovation, speed, scale, removing grudge work from your plate. And on the other side, fairness, trust, humanity, the themes that we've been hearing about all day today. The challenge is not choosing between them, but it's really making them work together. Now, innovation, at least in my opinion, is incredibly exciting. As I'm sure you all know, every 3 weeks there's a new AI model that comes out, or some boundary is broken by one of these AI systems, and they're getting incredibly sophisticated. We all now have PhDs in our pocket, as they keep telling us. You get scalability, you get consistency, you get automation. A teacher in Malaysia can evaluate a student in Brazil instantly. You can turn hours of manual labor into minutes of processing and really give yourself more information as an educator and better yourself. However, the faster we move, the less time we have to reflect and understand what's really going on. This was mentioned earlier as well. And, being in the space and seeing everything that's coming out every day, it's overwhelming. Every time you open social media, there's something new to buy, there's something new to check out, a new AI tool. It almost feels like they're forcing it on us at this point with all the innovations that are coming. That being said, it's important to remember that we have to take all this with a grain of salt and take time to evaluate it and not just rush to the next best thing in the hopes that it will solve all of our problems. I like to say that innovation is valuable only if it's directed. It needs a moral compass, as was already mentioned today. The integrity component of this cannot be understated. This really is the highlight of, or the theme of ICELAM, at least this year's conference. And what does integrity mean in this situation? It means slowing down enough to ask difficult questions. So as the CEO of a tech company, I'm sure you've all heard Mark Zuckerberg's famous quote, "Move fast and break things." This is simply not doable in the education space. If you move fast and break things in education, you can ruin lives. So as the CEO of a tech company, it's my job to take what we're doing and make sure that we're doing it carefully and doing it properly. So the questions that we ask, and when it comes to assessment specifically, are we actually assessing what matters or what's easiest to measure? It's very easy to measure multiple choice questions and determine a student's profile based on that, but that doesn't actually add anything for the school or for the student. It actually accomplishes close to nothing. The importance is actually assessing what matters and not what's easiest to measure. We also have to make sure that we're amplifying learning and not just automating judgment. Taking tests as a student is a terrible experience, especially high-stakes exams. Your entire academic career is basically set on a few hours of work. You have to fill out some forms. In the English world, you can be an all-star mathematician, you can be a brilliant person, but if you can't pronounce a few words correctly, your life is derailed. So again, the important thing here is that assessments are created and really focused on amplifying learning and not just automating the judgment of people. When a test determines someone's job, someone's visa, someone's future, it's not just a data point. And this is, I think, one of the most important points to make when it comes to maintaining integrity with the use of these AI tools. We're not just data points, we're all people, as our students, and they need to be treated as such. So how do we actually do this in practice? How do we hold both innovation and integrity together? And how do we implement this in the world of AI? We've boiled it down to two questions. When we implement something new, a new AI model, a new technology, a new rule, a new set of rules, does this make our assessments more efficient? Does it make it faster? Does it make it better? And of course, does it make the assessment more ethical? Are we making sure to account for the context of the student and what they're doing, and not just treating them as another data point to feed to the big data machine of Silicon Valley? If the answer is not yes to both, then you're out of balance. And it's not about, again, resisting technology, it's about directing it. Again, one of the things I say often is that the future of testing won't belong to the fastest adopters, it'll belong to the most thoughtful ones. Who is doing this correctly? I've mentioned two companies that I know of that have gone bankrupt in this space, tech companies from the US. I can name another 6 or 7 that have also gone under because they didn't take certain things into account when they were building their AI systems. And there's certainly going to be more to come in this graveyard of AI companies over the next few years. So, before I jump into the guiding principles of how to actually do this in your day-to-day, I was curious, in your professional usage of AI, does anyone have any experiences, positive or negative, with using AI in the classroom that they'd like to share? Just to get a little interactive here. That's all right. I'll continue and we can come back to a Q&A at the end. So, a lot of this has been theory, and as a practical tech person, I am not the biggest fan of theory. I am into implementing things in the real world. So at EduSynch, this is how we've implemented our AI systems. Everything is done with these 3 pillars in mind. First is fairness, second is transparency, and the third is human oversight. Now, fairness really means the outcome. How do we guarantee that if you and I take a test at the same time, the results are fair? It doesn't necessarily mean that one will be better or worse than the other, but how do we make sure that the AI system is treating everyone the same way, regardless of background, accent, writing style, et cetera, et cetera? This is probably the hardest thing to achieve in reality. And at EduSynch, this took us many iterations. We had to create some systems internally to guarantee that this was happening. And again, using humans to make sure that this was the way that it needed to be. A concrete example of this, at least in this English testing world, a fair AI system knows the difference between simple English and bad English. And fairness is what allows students to trust the result, and organizations. The Ministry of Education uses our system, so it must be fair. We have to guarantee that it's fair, otherwise it would be totally useless. There were a few instances of, as we were building our AI evaluation system and trying to figure this out for ourselves, it was a lot of trial and error. And there was an example of this from the early days, a couple of years ago, where we ran a test where our AI system was grading speaking responses, but students with British and Australian accents were getting lower scores than students with American accents. And this was because the AI system we were using was trained only on American accents. And we were unaware of this at the time. Again, this was 3 years ago. But this is the opposite of fairness. This is implicit bias in an AI system. So how can you possibly detect these kinds of things moving forward? It's a challenge, but needs to be done in a very rigorous way before you can actually implement these things in practice. After that discovery, every single time we integrate a new system or upgrade our systems, we always look back at this example and try to remember this so that we don't do it again. And implementing this, at least in my world, requires tons of testing, tons of QA, QC, using professionals, using humans to make sure that the results are fair and not biased based on some random AI system that's in a black box that nobody understands. Transparency is also key. Now, we do get students messaging us every day. Some of them message me personally asking why they got certain scores in their test. And as you can imagine, with thousands of students a day taking exams, it's not exactly sustainable. But transparency is key. So in terms of explaining to students, how does the evaluation system work? How am I getting scored as a student? How can I trust this system? So it really means, as an institution, showing your work. Not just making the students do it, but we have to do it too if we want to ensure that trust is maintained. So imagine, again, a student gets a score, 7 out of 10 from an AI evaluation system, but you can't explain to them as an educator how they got that score. So this is, again, unfair to the student, and this black box type of evaluation in education simply can't be sustained. Transparency is really how we build trust in the processes. I think a lot of people nowadays probably trust the AI systems more than they should. I'm not sure if all of you have heard of these cases of hallucinations in all of the AI systems that exist. This is when you ask ChatGPT a question and it responds with an answer that is 100% factually incorrect. But based on the way it responds, you would never know. There's actually a very funny case of this, maybe not funny to the lawyer that was involved, but in the US recently, there was a high-stakes legal situation where a lawyer presented their documentation of the case to a judge. And in legal terms, you have to use precedents, right? Cases that have come before yours that show why the law should be as it is today. And they used ChatGPT to generate their entire stack of documentation. And ChatGPT invented 4 or 5 different cases that never existed. and it used those as examples of why the law should be as it is today. As you can imagine, this lawyer was embarrassed as soon as he submitted this thing, didn't even check it over. But at that level, it took the court to recognize this and ask them, I've never heard of these cases don't exist, can you prove that these are real? And upon further research, they were all falsified. So again, transparency into the system is important because as educators, we simply can't let this kind of thing happen to students. And if it's happening at that level, you can imagine how it's happening in the corporate world too. So just remember, always double check your ChatGPT responses. Last but not least, human oversight. This is probably the most important part of this entire AI world, is that nothing should be finalized until a human being looks at it. In our case as EduSynch, we have these thousands of tests being done a day, but we have a team of people who are trained to go in and spot check and check ones that might be on the fringe of where we think a student's level should be. We have systems in place to detect if we think that a test may have been evaluated unfairly, and a human being will actually go in and look at it. For the clients of ours who are using the system, they have teams of people who will check the results before releasing them to students. So it really does depend on your organization and how you can implement this. And again, it's not easy. Human oversight is probably the most difficult part of this. But the idea really is that human oversight is what keeps these systems ethical and keeps them honest. Without human oversight, I don't even know where we're going to end up with this AI world. Now, again, this is really just a general framework for, as you go about your day-to-day, if you come across a situation where you're looking to integrate artificial intelligence into your day-to-day, how can you do it properly? With these three things in mind, I think you'll be able to basically implement AI into your assessment processes, into your coursework, into whatever you have to do. But again, it's these three questions. Is it fair? Is it transparent? Is it supervised by humans? If the answer is no, the idea would be to stop, go back, review, redesign, and try to think of another way of going about this. The benefits of AI are unparalleled. But as was mentioned earlier, doing it ethically takes time and it takes intention. And that's really what we as educators must do. If AI is the engine, we are the brakes, as they say. So just to dive into a few specific examples of this in the wild. How many of you have heard of Alpha School? Cool. So Alpha School is very new. This is a private school. I think they're in the US. I think they might be opening one in KL at some point in the near future. But they are an AI first school. So obviously that could mean anything. But in actuality, it's pretty fascinating. So they have basically reconceived what education looks like from the ground up, without any kind of baggage or preconceived ideas from how education currently is. So at Alpha School, at the youngest ages, you get a tablet. Your tablet is basically your AI buddy. Now, you only actually spend 3 to 4 hours a day doing real coursework. And that coursework is guided by AI agents, as they say, So let's say it's your time to do your math class. So your 8-year-old son or daughter will sit with their tablet, open up their math app, and their AI math agent will take them through whatever you learn in math class as an 8-year-old, maybe, geometry. So, and you sit there and the tablet actually guides the student. So the teacher no longer teaches. The teacher is also set there to guide. So they're there as a helping hand if the student has any problems or any questions. But the idea is that every student learns at their own pace. All the assessments are done inside of the specific apps as well on the devices. And they're done in a formative manner so that, again, they're not punitive. They're designed to reinforce learning. I think one of the more interesting parts about this is that the AI is not deciding anything. The AI is collecting data on the student and feeding it to the teachers, who are the ones who actually make decisions about the students moving forward and whether they progress or not. One of the other interesting things here is that outside of those 3 to 4 hours, the students are also doing practical things. So in middle school, you learn about taxes. In high school, you learn about the stock market. You learn how to balance a checkbook. You learn about a balance sheet. All things that I was never taught in school. I'm sure many of you were not, at least in the formative years. So the idea here, again, was to reimagine what education would look like if you built it today with everyone having their own AI to guide them. They did implement, in a certain way, the three pillars I mentioned before. Everything that they've done at Alpha School really does, again, personalize things for the students, but the AI systems are not deciding anything. They are aggregating all the data. They are helping the students along these personalized learning pathways, and feeding that information back to teachers so that the teachers are the ones who decide. There's also a few hours of physical education in there and general social skill building that I thought was also really interesting. So they'll do public speaking class and actually form groups and have students actually learn what it's like to debate ideas from an early age. So again, while obviously there are requirements that we must fulfill, it's interesting to look at this as a use case of ways that AI can be used to change our current notion of what education is. I highly encourage all of you to go check this out in your own time. Just Google Alpha School and read about it and look at some of the videos. It's pretty fascinating. How many of you have heard of Maersk, the Maritime company? So this is a cool example that I thought was interesting here, just to break away from the education industry specifically. So Maersk uses AI extensively throughout their training and testing processes. So my wife is actually in the maritime space, and she was the one who showed me some of the stuff they're doing here. And it's actually really interesting. So when you're preparing to get a job there or looking to get a job there, they'll put you through some AI scenario modeling. They'll actually have you sit in a simulator, and they'll have artificial intelligence render and showcase a scenario and watch how you deal with it. This can be anything from a storm coming in the middle of the night while you're trying to take oil off of an oil rig onto your vessel, or one of your teammates gets sick, and as the chief officer, you have to deal with it in real time and figure out what to do. Now, again, there are no right or wrong answers, but these scenarios are limitless, and this is only capable because of the way that they've implemented AI in their day-to-day. They also do this in a regular basis, not just for those applying for jobs, but for those who are working there. So to keep them abreast of situations that have come up, or just to make sure that everyone is on the same page. They run their actual employees through this training every 6 to 12 months, depending on your rank. Now again, the AI is used to model these scenarios and to basically assess your ability to deal with these kinds of situations in real time. But they're not the end-all be-all. My wife was telling me a story. They had a scenario where she was piloting the vessel and 2 of her employees ran out onto the deck, and one of them got killed by the AI system. It broke a wire and it snapped and hit the guy. Fred, I think, was the AI guy's name. And she had to call a helicopter and get them to come in. It was something that's never happened in the last 25 or 30 years of Maersk history, but they decided to throw her a curveball, or the AI did. And I thought it was just a fascinating example of how the AI can force you to think outside the box and really test your abilities. As a result, she was able to do this successfully, and those in power who were overseeing this obviously got a kick out of the whole thing. They had never seen this scenario as well. So again, just showing how thinking outside the box with these new tools can actually lead to some really interesting situations. But again, the lesson remains. The idea is not to replace humans, it's to enhance our ability as educators or as assessors to make decisions. Last but not least, this company EduSynch that I think you guys may have heard of. So during COVID, as I mentioned, we dove headfirst into this world of remote proctoring. Now, as you can imagine, during COVID, I'm sure, as you all remember where you were when we all got trapped in lockdown. So for students, this was particularly traumatic. Taking exams online, high-stakes exams online, were a huge deal. This was the front of every newspaper, magazine, at least in the US, about how if students can't take their entrance exams, universities can't get paid. And if they can't get paid, they shut. A number of universities around the US shuttered as a result of their inability to administer exams securely online. So when we dove into this space, again, we saw all types of companies out there trying to do things cheaply and as efficiently as possible. So as schools ran towards these AI-powered products, this was, again, 2021, so ChatGPT didn't exist yet, but a lot of the underlying tech was still similar in terms of what was being used by these other proctoring companies. So to give you all an idea of how these systems work, when you go to take an exam, you'll take a photo of yourself, take a photo of your ID, take a photo of yourself next to your ID, scan your testing environment with your webcam, and then during the test, you're actually being monitored through the webcam as well as your screen. So you can actually see what's going on the screen. Now, there's no silver bullet. It's not foolproof. Obviously, students are smarter than we are, so they always find ways to cheat on their exams. But the systems are very good at detecting if a student likely did something they should not have been doing. I don't like to use the word cheating. I like to say our job is to catch students if they're being academically dishonest or doing something academically dishonest before they do, catch them before they do it. So the whole idea here, at least the way we implemented this, is what we call human in the loop. It's actually in the industry called record and review. So when you're a student taking your test on EduSynch, you'll be able to finish your exam. At no point will we ever tell you that you failed your test. So we do tell you you're being monitored, and we have some psychological features built in there too. You know, if you move your mouse to a certain part of the screen, a giant message pops up that says, don't do that, we're watching. So not exactly those words, but you get the idea. But again, the idea here really is that the students will take their test. The AI system will flag based on what they're doing. So if they open up a new tab or window, plug in a second monitor, if we detect multiple voices, there's some 50 to 60 different things you can detect to a reasonable degree of certainty. And once they finish their test, we actually put the exam through a human review process. That means every single proctored exam is looked at by a human being after the fact. Now, granted, this does add cost to us, and it does take 24 hours to review every test, but it does a great job of preventing a lot of the problems that I mentioned during my presentation today. The human in the loop does allow us to identify false positives. It allows us to pick up on nuanced behavior that perhaps the AI system missed. And only after the human review is complete are we then telling the school what the decision is. Did we catch the student being academically dishonest, or are they good to go? Now again, the idea is for AI to do the heavy lifting here. So before this, we used to have people watching students take exams on Zoom, which, as you can imagine, is bizarre. So that's not ideal also. I mean, as a proctor, how can you possibly watch 100 students take an exam at the same time? It's just simply not possible. So while AI actually does the flagging of the events, the human in the loop is what makes this system foolproof and significantly more accurate and better for students as well as better for organizations. Again, the whole idea here is not just proctoring, it's thinking about accountability. So adding the human oversight component into the AI system keeps the efficiencies, sure, it reduces it a little bit in the sense that we have this review process, but it really does allow you to find a sweet spot in terms of implementing this at your organization. So, where do we go from here? All this theory, all these ideas, frameworks, how do you actually put this into practice? And the idea here really is, as educators, it's up to us. We can't let Sam Altman and the guys at Facebook and Microsoft tell us what to do. The technology is great, but who implements it is us. As educators, we are responsible for our students, we're responsible for our organizations, and that accountability rests with us. So the idea really is not to let them dictate what to do, but for us to do it ourselves. So just as a practical way of going about this, the idea is start with awareness. Everyone is aware of the AI systems that exist. Many of you have even used them in your day-to-day at work. But the idea really is to be aware of what's possible to do with these systems, and to be aware of what you can do as an educator, and to be aware of what they're capable of. So it's really diving deeper into how the models work. We're not trying to understand the technology behind an LLM. That's not what I mean. I really mean what kind of data is being used for the models? Who's designing the model? What voices are missing from the training? I mentioned that use case before of one of the first iterations we did, where we weren't aware that the system we were using had only been trained on American accents. As you can imagine, that doesn't make sense for a language testing company to only allow assessments in one accent. So just a concrete example of how not being aware of the system that you're using can backfire. It's also not just technical awareness, but ethical awareness. We can't just trust that ChatGPT is our friend and is neutral. It just doesn't work like that. We have to question it. We have to audit it. We have to make sure that it's doing what we want it to do. So a school that understands how AI works for their students, how the scoring works, how they're using it, can explain it to the students. And that allows you to maintain trust. So if you're not aware of how the system that you're implementing works, it's going to end up backfiring at some point. The next is my favorite, which is action. Awareness without action is just anxiety. Just looking and researching these tools without actually using them, I think, is not a productive exercise. Sure, it's great to understand how a lot of them work, but the idea really is, how do we make it work for us? There's a lot of them out there, and a lot of them have their strengths and weaknesses, and a lot of them are perhaps good for certain use cases and others not. You know, I asked you about those three in the beginning, ChatGPT, Claude, and Perplexity. They say that Perplexity, for instance, is better for research, where ChatGPT is better for programming and Claude is better for writing. So I don't necessarily agree with those assessments of those three, but you know, as you play with the different tools that are out there, and as you experiment and see what works for you, you'll get a better idea of which ones make sense. Action also means creating policies at the organizational level for how these systems can be used. Just a quick question here. How many of you at your schools or organizations ban the use of AI for your students fully? No? Good. This is something that's been happening across the US, where schools are banning the use of ChatGPT or any of the AI systems, and they're even using AI detectors to see if the students are using AI. Have you all heard of these AI detectors before? Good, because they don't work either. So don't trust them. We tried to build one ourselves. I've used every single one out there. You can actually take text from old scriptures. My favorite is taking a quote from the Bible and putting it in there and seeing that it's 97% chance it was written by AI. So again, don't trust the detectors. Anyone who says that they work is probably trying to sell you something. So the idea here, again, is taking meaningful action, and action that makes sense. Banning the systems will only make the students use them more. It simply doesn't work to do that. And again, creating the policies around them. So fair use of the systems, or teaching your students how to use them. There's a lot of ways to go about it. I don't personally have a recommendation for this. It really depends on your organization and what you're trying to do. You know, for us, just to give you a concrete example of this, we started just using ChatGPT. We then discovered there were a lot of different AI-powered companies that I had never heard of that specialize in transcription. So transcribing spoken words into text. Then there are other companies that specialize in scoring those words at each syllable of the word at the phoneme level, so to speak. So then you combine all three of those with your own internal system, and then you basically have EduSynch. So we don't rely on one specific system. We have 4 or 5 in place, that we use to do this. And again, the idea being that when we started down this journey of using AI to do the evaluations, my initial thought process was, just throw it into ChatGPT and it will be fine. It will do everything for you. It's just not the case. And again, taking meaningful action in your use case is the most important thing to take away here. And last but not least, alignment, which I just touched on, but the idea is not just using AI for the sake of using AI, but making sure it aligns with your organization's values, with your objectives and, again, human values and our objectives as educators. Unbridled use of AI in any use case is probably not the best use of AI, again, depending on what you're trying to do. But this does require discipline. It's very easy to outsource a lot of our thinking, a lot of our general day-to-day to these systems in the hope that it will make our lives easier. And in reality, it will. But again, if you do this too often, you'll find yourself unable to write an email or unable to think critically about important things. So as educators, we have to keep that in mind as well. We need to make sure that the AI actually respects human thinking and not the other way around. And alignment really means designing systems where innovation serves learning. We're not innovating for the sake of innovating. We're innovating because our students need it. It's beneficial to them. It's beneficial to us as an organization. So I think this idea of aligning the technology with our objectives really is probably the most important thing moving forward, especially as these systems get more intelligent and more prolific. All of this to say, we can't let AI shape us. We have to shape it. And I really like this image because it is our job as educators to figure this out. We are the so-called last line of defense here. If we don't enforce this, no one will. And again, as we read studies of students outsourcing every single decision in their day to these systems, it's worrisome to think about where the world is headed unless we do something about it. The fact of the matter is you can't put the genie back in the bottle. AI is already here. The amount of money and time and resources being poured into this technology is unparalleled in our lifetimes. This is 100 times more than what we saw in any previous technological wave. And I'm living proof that it works. EduSynch is living proof that it works. But again, it has to be contained. It has to be structured in a way that works for you. If we were just throwing everything we got to the AI and hoping it did our work for us, we wouldn't have a company. So again, if there's one thing that you take away from this presentation today, it is that as educators, we must shape AI and we can't let it shape us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sean, for that insightful presentation. I guess from now on, we can replace the word cheating with the word academically dishonest. We will now open the floor for questions. If you have any questions, please raise your hand and we will pass the microphone to you. Before asking your questions, kindly state your name and where you are from.
Sure. Great.
Okay, so my question is very simple. I'm very interested in the online proctoring that you're talking about. So my question is, how feasible is that? So many students, thousands of students being online. So is there enough manpower to go around? One. Number two, in Malaysia, we have Malaysian English universities. That's what is EduSynch CFR, for example, applicable for students to try out and somehow related to an exam. If I were to talk about it, Thank you.
Sure. Well, two great questions. So the first one is interesting. So obviously, because of the high volume of students, we have to have a high volume of individuals who are trained to do this. So we've had to expand our proctoring team significantly since our test here has grown. So every test taken in Malaysia is proctored and reviewed by a person. So it is a challenge as a business to do it, but we do have this team of up to 100 people now who are on call and will basically receive an email when they have a test to evaluate, and they'll go in and evaluate it, or at least the proctoring component. So sure, as that number scales up, we'll have to hire and train more, but the system was built with this in mind. We're willing to take on the cost to make sure that the system is doing its job, and we're not just flagging students incorrectly and failing them. The second part of your question for the MUET. So right now, the EduSynch CEFR level test is specifically for certifying teachers. I think we're one of 6 exams here that allows for teacher certification. We're actively working on allowing for student certification as well. So I think there's 3 other exams outside of the MUET that are at that level. So hopefully in the next 6 to 12 months, that will be the case as well. So I'll be sure to let you know as soon as we've reached that milestone.
Okay, for the next question.
Sure. Right. Mhm. Mhm. Okay.
As a result. So how this condition concerning time condition, how your system tell us. Do you think there is no standard like that? There is no
Right. It's a great question. So you're right. The systems by definition, they don't have fatigue. And at least the way that we've designed ours, the whole idea is to standardize the approach to the evaluation. So in that specific example, I'd imagine, the test only analyzes the student at that specific time. So that evening, perhaps he was tired, not paying attention, maybe not as sharp as he would have been if he had tried the test earlier in the day. So that's probably most likely what it was. But you're right, this is one of the downsides of the system, is that the context of the student is not possible to understand. So the way that we've designed ours, and again, we do encourage our partners to test their students in whatever window they normally test the students in. And we'll have students who message us daily and tell us, I was tired, I didn't do well on my tests, can I retest? And we usually say yes. So, the system really is only designed to analyze the student at that specific time when they do their exam. There is unfortunately no solution that we've been able to come up with to allow the AI to understand the context of the user. In fact, a lot of what we do is to standardize that. We don't want the AI system to know that the student's from Indonesia, the student's from India, the student's from the US, to kind of prevent any inherent bias in the response. So everything that we do is we take all of our responses that we've gathered over the last decade, and we use that to train the system. So it's not trained on one specific correct accent. It's not trained on one specific correct pronunciation. There may be 2 or 3 different variations that one can use to make sure that, if that student had spoken in I guess, more British format than American English, they would still get a high score. But yeah, and it's an interesting question. In that situation, I would have recommended the student take the test again in the morning so that they were a little bit less tired. But it's interesting. One day, hopefully, we can find a solution for that.
Okay, for the next question, please.
Thank you, Sean, for how I test advantage. Right, given that we're using tests, I would like to know how are the 4 major components, right, being assessed in your test? Are they evaluated entirely by AI, or is it a combination of AI? This one. Second question would be, how is
Sure. So both great questions. So the exam that is currently certified by the Ministry of Education in Malaysia is actually not adaptive. So it's standardized similarly to a TOEFL or an IELTS. And the level of difficulty and the structure, I would say, is what makes it more of a proficiency test as opposed to a placement test. We do have some schools that use it for placing students, but its real use case is for establishing your level of proficiency. So again, that exam that is being used here is not adaptive. We do have a placement test that we built. It's a separate exam that is adaptive. So every 5 questions, it will adjust based on your performance. And the way that we assess the 4 skills across all of our tests, reading and listening are primarily multiple choice, or they have some question formats where you get partial credit. So all of that is, I guess you could say it's AI. It's more just general automatic marking. The speaking and writing for certain exams are evaluated by AI. For the test in Malaysia, we still actually have human beings using or doing the evaluations. So with that team I mentioned earlier in my presentation that was 1,000 and is now down to around 100, all of those are certified English teachers, primarily from the US and UK, who will actually receive and score the tests. And spoken and written proficiency, at least in our world, is assessed across 4 criteria. So speaking involves accent and pronunciation, grammar, vocab, and fluency and coherence. So again, if you're pausing unnaturally or using filler words. And then writing also has 4 criteria: content development, grammar, vocab, and coherency as well. So just is you're writing fluid or using punctuation too much. So that rubric, we've been using that for years, and the human evaluators have been trained to score using that rubric. And as a result, the AI has also been trained to score using that rubric. So when the AI system does do the test, or does do the evaluations, you'll get feedback for each one of those criteria on the exam. The humans also give feedback, but more general as opposed to specific across those criteria. I hope that answered the 2 questions. Yeah, so this is an interesting question. I think that the humans do a better job of this than the AI system, inevitably. But as we're able to continuously train the AI system on the results we're getting, and as the humans are evaluating exercises, we're also feeding those into the automated marking system. So the system is learning, how to better evaluate creativity. And we don't actually penalize students for being creative in their writing. So as long as they're answering whatever's being asked, they can really write or speak about whatever they want, and we'll evaluate it across those 4 criteria. One of the more interesting things that happens often is that when the students know they're being evaluated by AI, they will memorize something at home, and then they'll come to the test, they'll ignore the question, and they'll just say whatever they memorized. Perfect American accent, perfect pronunciation. It took us a while to get this right, but now we can detect that. And if they do that, because the AI can now understand context. So we actually feed the AI the question as well, so that it knows what is being asked, so it has an idea of what kind of answer should be given. And if the answer is entirely off topic, the student will get a very low score. So, but it's a work in progress. This analysis of the creativity of the student is a great question, and it's something that we're constantly working on.
Okay, I'll open to the next questions.
Okay, thank you so much. I think you have had a question about human differences, contexts. There are quite so many accents which our college does. Then the other question I have is about natural disability. Someone may be fluent in the language, and some other natural disability which can easily be detected by a human being.
Right.
Does AI take into consideration? Another question is about we want to avoid the word cheating, but because that's what I know, I'll So I think that people cheat, especially if you don't understand those are behind these tests. So they think that all they need is a certificate on paper
Right.
to pass and
Sure.
so my question here is, what strategies have you put in place to ensure that these participants understand the relevance of this program, so that it's not just about passing this test, but they have the certificate, they have the scores, but they're also fluent. Does the score really reflect fluency?
Fantastic questions. So the first one around, can the AI system detect stuttering and speech disabilities? The short answer is that yes, in many situations it can, but not nearly as well as a human being. So there are instances where our system will evaluate someone and then the student will come back and complain to the school, and we'll go in and dive deeper, and it will turn out that there was some kind of disability there where the system didn't pick it up, in which case we'll have a human being go in and analyze it. We're currently trying to figure out, obviously doing this 100% of the time is impossible, but we're trying to figure out how we can do this more accurately. So setting up systems to detect a stutter or a potential speech impediment, which the more recent models can now do pretty accurately. So, as I mentioned, we have 4 or 5 different AIs that we use on the back end to basically analyze every question. So when you submit a spoken response, it will run through these 4 or 5 different steps. And the last one is an internal prompt that EduSynch has built over the last 3 years, which basically dictates how the system should go about analyzing the spoken response. And now some of that involves detecting spoken disabilities and trying to pick up these more nuanced problems. But again, not 100% accurate. So another work in progress. As far as the second part of your question, it's difficult for us, being the owner of the assessment, to instill in the students this idea that it's not just a test, but it's part of your academic journey. So one of the ways that we try to go about this is, not explaining to the students specifically, but working with the organizations. We typically sell our platform to schools and companies, working with them to have the testing be more regular. So as opposed to being, your exam is coming in 3 months, and if you don't do well, you're done, your life is over. We want it to be more of a part of the active educational experience. So take a test every few days, issue your students an exam, a spoken test this week, a written test next week, make it part of the curriculum, make it more of the academic journey as opposed to this single milestone. That way they don't treat it as such, and they're less likely to cheat if they know that the test is just part of their day-to-day, as opposed to this line in the sand where if they do well, they'll get a high score. In actuality, especially for the students in Malaysia who are taking their tests and are proctored, we do have students who use Grammarly or ChatGPT on the test, and we'll almost always give them another exam. Benefit of the doubt, didn't know that we were detecting this, or we understand maybe you opened this by accident, so erring on the side of caution, we'll give you a second chance, just don't do it again. So it's really a fine balance though. There really is no real way of doing that. It's quite difficult, and we're trying to work with the schools that we work with to kind of instill this idea in the students.
Okay, one last question.
Assalamualaikum. Very good morning to one and Zamia from I just would like to ask about the form that you guys set up, which is for the assessment using AI. Then you mentioned about humanity in the loop, whereby the results of AI assessment give back to the human to check right or incorrect. So my question to you is about the conflicts. How many percentage after the human review will be some inconsistence, because humans sometimes they feel fatigue. Right? This will somehow will change the results. It will be a complete AI results. How do you?
It's a great question. And I don't mean for this to sound as it might sound when I say it, but the AI is actually better at assessing exams in many situations than the humans. So in recent tests that we've done, and we didn't actually conduct them, but some of our partners who did this efficacy testing of the AI evaluations, they found that 94% of the tests that were done over the last 3 months were 100% accurate in terms of the student's level. So this is specifically around English fluency. So the system over the last 3 years as we've been developing it and changing it and altering it has gotten quite accurate. Obviously not 100%, but 94% accurate to the student's level is quite good. When it comes to the proctoring, it's a little bit more challenging because the AI system will often pick up things that were not actually cheating. And for those, we have 100% of the tests are evaluated by humans after the AI system. So whoever asked that other question before, it does add an extra cost and it adds an extra delay. It takes 24 hours for those tests to come back. But without the human in the loop, it wouldn't be possible to do it correctly, and not doing it correctly wouldn't make sense to do because it just is so significant for so many students. If you do it incorrectly, it can literally ruin their lives. So when we started down this journey and we were figuring out how to do it, we found that the human in the loop was the only way to do it. When it comes to the English testing, a lot of that efficacy testing and making sure it's correct is done retroactively. So issue exams over the course of a month or two, and then the schools who have already done the placement testing for the students themselves will go back and analyze the results to make sure that they align. But yeah, the AI has it's gotten much better, as the underlying models have improved and our own understanding of how the models work has improved, the scoring has improved as well. So again, we still offer a team of certified humans, English teachers, who will evaluate certain exams. But at this point, almost all of our partners are switching to the AI model just because of efficiencies and lack of fatigue, and just the turnaround time is 2 minutes instead of 24 hours.
Ladies and gentlemen, our session has come to an end. I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Sean Killerchen for sharing his valuable insights with us today. Let's give him a collective round of applause.
Thank you.
As a token of appreciation, I would like to invite Yang Berusaha Encik Nur Azmi bin Ahmad, Director of Institut Aminuddin Baki, Genting Highlands Branch, to present the keynote speech session certificate to Mr. Sean Killerchen. Please welcome. Thank you, Mr. Nur Azmi, and Mr. Sean, you may now be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to once again thank Mr. Sean Killerchen, the co-founder and CEO of EduSynch, for his contributions to the 4th ICELAM 2025. We would also like to thank our audience for your active participation and thoughtful questions. Your engagement has enriched our learning experience and development. We would like to give a gentle reminder to all to scan the QR code before you leave and fill in the 4th ICELAM 2025 evaluation form. Your cooperation is truly appreciated. This conference has given us opportunities to share our knowledge and build our network. Therefore, please feel free to engage with each other during the conference. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this session. Please enjoy the rest of the conference, and we hope to see all of you again in the future. Goodbye and have a good day ahead.